With Witch Queen on the horizon and Christmas having just passed, there are three different groups of people in Destiny right now. Those who are paid players and are going to buy the next DLC, those who are free-to-play players and are going to stay free-to-play, and finally, those who are free-to-play players and are going to bridge that gap to being a paid player with Witch Queen. Regardless of what group you're in, this video should be useful to you. Today's video is the ultimate guide to free-to-play legendary weapons inside Destiny 2 PvE, meaning that you can earn every single weapon I talk about today without having ever paid a dime. We're going to be going over these weapons one at a time by weapon category, discussing how to get them, and what weapon perks to be on the lookout for when you get them to drop for you. A bit of a heads up for those new to the channel though, today's list is very much centered on a weapon's in-game viability, as my entire channel is centered around that aspect of PvE. With that said, I do feature some weapons that aren't necessarily the best in things like master content, but I feature them regardless because they really excel at what they do. Basically what I'm saying here is don't be surprised if you don't see any sidearms or weapons whose best attribute is that it rolls Outlaw Rampage. They just won't make the cut. With that said, like the video if you liked it, comment down below to support the ferocious YouTube algorithm, and subscribe to the channel to see more from me. Let's jump into this. Starting things off, we have the auto rifle category. Here we have the Last Breath and Shadow Price, with the Seraph Carbine and Sorrow's Verse being honorable mentions. So to kick things off, the Last Breath comes from the Cube encounter in the Prophecy Dungeon and is a 600 RPM kinetic. Its fantastic combination of perk combos is what makes it so special, and you can see those here. In the first column, we have Demolitionist and Subsistence, with the second column featuring Adrenaline Junkie, Frenzy, and One For All. This leaves you with the ability to get both in-game and casual rolls of this weapon, as Demolitionist Adrenaline is just going to pop off in casual content, and Demolitionist combined with either Frenzy or One For All is going to ensure that you can keep up both a constant damage buff against tankier enemies, and keep consistent grenades on your side once those enemies are eliminated. Up next from the Last Breath, we have one of the most iconic weapons in Destiny history, the Shadow Price. Shadow Price is obtained through Nightfall Strikes and is a 450 RPM arc weapon, with the Cadet variant being available through Grandmasters. Taking a look at the perks, we have 4th times the Charm and Overflow in the first column, with the second having One For All as well as Disruption Break. With Anti-Barrier Auto Rifle being present the past 2 seasons, a role like 4th times and Disruption Break is an absolute banger. 4th times will help provide that sustained damage with your magazine being refilled, and Disruption will net you a 50% damage buff to your kinetic weapons to the target whose shield you broke, even if it's Anti-Barrier. That can be a fairly niche role, however, so you can always go with a more consistently viable perk like One For All to get that 35% damage bonus. Up next, we can't talk about auto rifles without speaking on the previous king of them all, the 7th Seraph Carbine. Now, although Warmind cells have seen a nerf since the new season, they're not bad by any means. I'll put up a clip of me using them post-nerf, and you'll notice that they still absolutely slay out, although not nearly as much as they used to, making this an honorable mention. Now, the Carbine rolls similar to Shadow Price, although instead of 4th times Disruption, it rolls with Vorpal instead, which Vorpal recently got a buff on primaries and now provides 20% extra damage instead of 15 whenever fighting bosses or champs, so this might be worthwhile. Think of the Seraph Carbine as kinetic Shadow Price with Warmind cells, and you can get it through the Gunsmith or sometimes the Dares of Eternity in chest, and if you happen upon this weapon's god roll, I definitely hold on to it. Lastly, for the auto rifles, I'd like to talk about the Sorrow's Verse. This weapon drops from the Crucible, and holy shit, look at that perk pool! Yeah, that's a lot of perks. So for the most part in this video, anytime I feature a weapon with a perk pool this massive, it's going to be an honorable mention despite how good the weapon is, because of how hard a god roll is to obtain, making it pretty unrealistic for most of you guys that are watching this. That being said though, if you're able to bag yourself a god roll, I'd argue this is one of the best in slot energy auto rifles. Don't get me wrong, I love weapons like Gnawing Hunger for example, but Sorrow's Verse brings the strong suits of that weapon and a bunch of in-game viability at the same time because of its perk set. Taking a look at the first column, I'd be on the lookout for either 4th times or Subsistence, with your final column looking something like Frenzy, One For All, and maybe multi-kill clips for casual content. Now, moving on from autos, let's waste no time and segue on over to scout rifles. Here we have the Night Watch, Vision of Confluence, Eternal Blazon, and both Hung Jury and Servant Leader as honorable mentions. Starting off with the Night Watch, this weapon right here is in the World Loot Pool, but also drops as a literal god roll via the New Light quest, and I cannot stress this enough, do not dismantle this weapon! Back during Season of the Splicer, we had a very hefty Scout Rifle meta thanks to Scout Rifle barrier mods, and this new light roll was by my side the entire season when tackling master content. I really think people as a whole underestimate just how good Scout Rifles are. Overflow is great as it overfills your magazine past its limit when picking up ammo, and Explosive Payload is pretty much the best PvE perk you can get as it's a constant 11% damage buff to the head and 15% to the body while also negating damage drop off by a heavy amount. Night Watch is godlike for in-game content and the game gives it straight to you, so you can't go wrong there. A quick honorable mention coming off of Night Watch that I'd like to mention is the Hung Jury Scout Rifle. Now this weapon is an honorable mention because it's basically just a harder to get kinetic scout compared to Night Watch's free god roll, as you have to grind Nightfalls for this one, and also Night Watch's archetype is superior in my opinion, so I myself never use Hung Jury despite having the god roll. But this comparison to Night Watch mainly applies to in-game content, as Hung Jury does have a really fun casual content role that many players use in the form of Subsistence and Firefly. The explosion kills from Firefly actually activate Subsistence and refill its magazine, which is a really cool interaction, but outside of that, there's not much reason to use Hung Jury over Night Watch, especially in in-game content. Moving on though, let's talk about some elemental scout rifles right quick, and although there doesn't exist a void free-to-play scout yet, we do have some really good options for both solar and arc. Starting off with the Vision of Confluence, this weapon comes from the Vault of Glass, and you're also able to get a time loss variant if you conquer Vogg's Master Mode. It comes with a very unique Rewind Rounds perk in the first column for great sustained damage, as well as Kill Clip, Disruption Break, and Frenzy in the final column. Also, if you're really big on abilities, this is one of the few weapons that can roll with Wellspring in the first column, and being able to accompany Wellspring with a damage perk, so if abilities are your thing, you might want that over Rewind Rounds. It's one of the most underrated scouts in the game in my opinion, and a must-have for content that has solar shields. Lastly, we have the Eternal Blazon Scout for the arc element, and this weapon is found in the World Loot Pool. It can come with Overflow and Rapid It in the first column, with Kill Clip, One for All, and Disruption in the second. It's the same archetype as Night Watch, so just think of it as an elemental version with One for All instead. To end off our talk about scout rifles, I just want to mention a final honorable mention in the form of Servant Leader. Now this weapon right here comes from Gambit, and were it not for an incredibly rare god roll to bag, I would place it higher than Night Watch for the kinetic slot. It's a fully automatic rapid fire frame scout that also has a fantastic scope to allow you to distance yourself in activities like Grandmaster content, while also being able to pepper enemies from afar no problem. You'll notice that the perk pool is absolutely massive, but if you can bag yourself a roll with 4th time, Subsistence, Outlaw, or Rapid It, with Kill Clip, One for All, or Frenzy in the second column, keep that bad boy and cherish it. I personally would love to have a flared Magwell, Rapid It, One for All roll myself, and maybe one day I'll get it, but today is not that day. Moving on from scout rifles, we have our bestest 3-burst friends, the pulse rifles. For this category, we only have 2, the BXR-55 and the Darkest Before. First up for pulse rifles, we have a weapon in God roll that has eluded me since day one, and that's the Darkest Before from the Prophecy Dungeon. This weapon belongs in the rapid fire frame of pulse, meaning, well, you can fire it at a rapid pace, its arc element, and comes with the perks Overflow Subsistence in the first column and One for All in the second. I've been chasing a good Overflow One for All roll for a very long time now, as Darkest Before is the best arc pulse in the game in my opinion, and it's one that you definitely shouldn't be sleeping on if you indulge in match game content. Up next from Darkest Before, we have one of my favorite weapons in the game right now, and that totally 100% has nothing to do with me being a Halo fanboy, the BXR-55 Battler Solar Pulse Rifle. With its own unique frame giving it perfect hipfire accuracy, a really awesome scope that provides some great range, and an awesome perk set, how could you not like this thing? The BXR is also one of the only good solar pulses in the game in my opinion, so that definitely helps its case for master content too. Taking a look at the perks, we have the combination of Demo and Adrenaline Junkie, as well as Demo Kill Clip for master content. I love this weapon to death, and I adore Bungie for adding it to Destiny. Moving on from pulse rifles, we have ourselves the old reliables of the Destiny franchise, Handcannons. For this category, we have the Fatebringer, Judgment, Annual Skate, and lastly, Palindrome. To kick things off, why don't we talk about the best hand cannon in the game, the Fatebringer from Vault of Glass. Fatebringer is one of those guns that's so hard to put down once you get a god roll of it, as it by far has the best perk set out of any hand cannon in the game, and it's not even close. Starting off with the first column, we have Explosive Payload, just an instant S tier perk, and where Fatebringer really shines is that you can couple this S tier damage perk alongside yet another damage perk. We have perks like Kill Clip, Frenzy, Adrenaline Junkie, and even Firefly that can all add on to this payload perk. Personally, the best perk roll in this weapon for me is Explosive Payload and Frenzy, as you're looking at a 26% damage buff to all your shots as long as Frenzy is up, and that's damn near the equivalent of having Kill Clip active 100% of the time on top of Frenzy's reload buff. Now, this isn't to say that Fatebringer is necessarily the end-all be-all hand cannon, because while it is the best, there are still things that it can't do unlike others, and for this instance, the Judgment hand cannon from Prophecy would like a word. By far one of the most slept on weapons in the game, Judgment can roll with either Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie at the same time for those lethal grenade builds, or Demolitionist Time Payload for master content and being able to benefit from added grenades. Time Payload also gives you 1% more damage than Explosive Payload, and while very minuscule, I figured I'd mention it. But yeah, Fatebringer is pretty much your hand cannon to slay out as far as bullets are concerned, but if you're an ability person, Judgment needs to be on your radar. Up next from Kinetic Hand Cannons, let's talk about one of my favorite of all time elemental hand cannons, the Annual Skate from the World Loot Pool. This weapon is on this list simply because it can do things no other hand cannon can. For instance, unlike Fatebringer, it can have both sustained damage and a payload perk at the same time thanks to triple tap and timed payload. And another cool thing about Annual Skate is that it's one of the very few guns in the game that can spawn Warmind cells without being an Ikelos or Seraph weapon. Because time payload is an explosion that takes place after the initial shot, and Annual Skate being a solar weapon, Wrath of Rasputin will actually count any kill from time payload as a solar splash kill, allowing it to create cells. Annual Skate is incredibly slept on with really cool and unique quirks, so I highly recommend it for the energy slot. Now for the last hand cannon on today's video, we of course can't end things off without talking about the Palindrome Void hand cannon, which drops from Nightfalls. Just like Fatebringer, you can get an adept variant of this weapon to make it even better than the original, and Palindrome has the very nice role of Overflow 1-for-all, the same as Darkest before. Palindrome being a 140 makes proccing 1-for-all super easy, and Overflow gives Palindrome a massive magazine at times to truly take advantage of that 35% damage buff. I personally think Annual Skate is a much more appealing hand cannon, but it's not nearly as farmable as Palindrome is, and I also couldn't disrespect Pally by not including it in today's video. Very solid hand cannon for the energy slot, don't sleep on it. Now, up next from hand cannons, it's time to talk about the fast-firing boys themselves, submachine guns. Here we have the stochastic variable and the Ikelos SMG, with two honorable mentions, the Cold Front and Borrowed Time. The first of which I want to talk about is Stochastic Variable. This weapon comes from the World Loot Pool, and this weapon right here has damn near zero viability inside master content. But it excels so good in casual content that I would be doing it a disservice by making it an honorable mention. Stochastic Variable is simply the modern day Recluse. When considering its stats, its perks, and its archetype, it's quite literally the closest thing we have to Recluse right now, and I'm all for it. This weapon originally came out during Splicer, and day one of that season I bagged a Feeding Frenzy multi-kill clip roll, and since then have never put it down. All I have to say is an SMG firing at 900 rounds per minute with damn near 40 in the magazine with lightning fast reload speed and a 50% damage buff on top of all that, you can't ask for much better. Go with Feeding Frenzy multi-kill clip, maybe even Flared Magwell for your magazine to truly play into that reload speed, and shredding down enemies will never be easier. Now moving on to a more in-game friendly SMG though, we have the old-fashioned Ikelos SMG. Now as we spoke about earlier, Warmind cells are still a very viable option, but I'm not even going to speak about those when discussing this weapon because it doesn't even need them. Ikelos SMG is possibly the most solid feeling weapon in the game for me, regardless of what perks or build I'm using. Ikelos rolls with the very unique magazine Seraph rounds, as well as Threat Detector and Subsistence in the first column, with Surrounded, Vorpal, or Demo in the second. Very solid weapon, comes from the World Loot Pool, and if you don't already have one, what are you doing? It's fantastic, enough said. Lastly, for the SMGs, I want to talk about two quick honorable mentions, starting with Cold Front. Cold Front is a super solid 750 for the kinetic slot, and you can farm it out via the annual Dawning event. It rolls with Subsistence in the first column, as well as Surrounded, Rampage, Swash, and One for All in the second, so it ain't too shabby. Now lastly, we have Borrowed Time from Gambit, and just like Servant Leader, bagging a god roll here is absolute hell. Regardless though, be on the lookout for Overflow, Threat Detector in the first column, with Frenzy, Demo, or One for All in the second. It's arguably the best SMG for in-game content that we have, but also the hardest to get your hands on. Moving on from the submachine guns, we have a fairly short section, the combat bows. Here we have the Point of the Stag for elemental and Whispering Slab for kinetic. First up, we pretty much have the end-all be-all arc elemental bow, the Point of the Stag. This weapon right here is literally just a god roll waiting to be claimed, as you can snatch it up from the kiosk in the tower by your vault. Now, it'll set you back a shard and some prisms, but those are pretty easily gotten by just about everybody by leveling up Crucible, Vanguard, and hell, even Xur now that the 30th anniversary came out. Point of the Stag rolls with Archer's Tempo for faster fire rate, as well as Vorpal giving it 20% extra damage on champs and bosses. It's the perfect bow for in-game content, and if you don't already have one, it'll be waiting for you at the tower. The last bow I want to talk about right quick is the Whispering Slab kinetic bow from the World Loot Pool. This weapon is literally a kinetic Point of the Stag, as you can get Archer's Tempo and Vorpal on it, and that's pretty much what I recommend here. Unfortunately, free-to-play players don't have that many options when it comes to bows, but these two picks are incredibly strong, so I'm sure they'll serve you well. Now moving on from combat bows, let's finally make our way into the special weapons of the video, starting off with shotguns. Here we have the First In Last Out and the Wastelander M5. Starting out, I want to talk about the First In Last Out slug from the World Loot Pool. This weapon type, although nerfed, is still really good, and First In Last Out is one of the best when it comes to slugs in PvE. This weapon is great for dealing with high health bars, and the god roll that you're looking for is Assault Mag for that rate of fire, auto-loading to allow you to swap to something else for damage and still get that reload, and Vorpal weapon making it great for bursting down champs or bosses. We're not really any slug shotgun meta like we used to be for the past few seasons, but still, slugs are great, and this shotgun would make an excellent piece for any Guardians collection. Now moving on from First In Last Out, we have our only other shotgun of the video, and that's the Wastelander M5 from Dares of Eternity. Inside of PvE, shotguns aren't really all that useful outside of slugs, unless you're running a 1-2 punch build, and that's where the Wastelander comes into play. Unfortunately, the very popular hammer build with Titans, or even the Liar's Handshake build with Hunters, can't be used without being a paid player, but if you're a free-to-play player and thinking about purchasing DLCs in the future, the Wastelander M5 is going to be the best shotgun in the game as far as 1-2 punch goes. The main reason for this is due to it being a lightweight frame, giving it super fast handling for fast swap speeds, and even faster movement speed as a whole. Combine that with its great perk combo of Lead from Gold and 1-2 punch, and you really can't get much better than this. I'm only featuring this as an honorable mention because you do need to be a paid player to take full advantage of it, but overall it's an S tier weapon for certain builds, so don't be afraid to farm one just in case you might use it in the future. Moving on from shotguns, we have every in-game player's best friend, the grenade launchers. Here we have the Pardon Our Dust, Truth Teller, Empty Vessel, Savager Salvo, and finally an honorable mention in the form of Interference. First up, I want to talk about one of the best weapons you could be using for your kinetic slot period, and that's the Pardon Our Dust Kinetic GL. This weapon comes from Dares of Eternity and is the only kinetic GL that's available for free-to-play players, and hot take incoming, I think it's better than Ignition Code. Now, I feel like I'm always talking about blinding nades, even to the point of creating an entire video on them, so I won't go on a huge tangent, but know this. Blinding nades are the strongest thing a person could ask for inside master content in this game. Enemies melt you quick, and what better way to keep them from doing that than just taking away their ability to melt? Pop a blinding nade and you're good to go. The role I recommend here is blinding nades, auto-loading holster, and either demo or Vorpal weapon. I wouldn't go for Danger Zone, as Danger Zone only increases the blast of the blinding nades and not the blinding effect itself. Next up from Pardon Our Dust, we essentially have what is the elemental versions of that GL in the forms of Empty Vessel and Truth Teller. Empty Vessel comes from the Strike playlist, and you're going to want pretty much an identical role to Pardon Our Dust, although with it being solar, you could spec into a Warmind Cell build and rock Spike Nades, Ambitious Assassin, Multi-Kill Clip. All you'd have to do is slap on Wrath of Rasputin and you're good to go. Truth Teller, just like Empty Vessel, is going to have a very similar role to Pardon Our Dust, auto-loading demo, and you can find Truth Teller in the World Loot Pool. And for our last main pick for grenade launchers, we have the Savager Salvo, which is a ritual weapon. And if you're a new player, chances are you'll find the quest for it at Shaxx, the Drifter, Zavala, or Gunsmith. If not there, then check your abandoned quest kiosk, and this applies for all ritual weapons in today's video. Salvager Salvo is essentially the best add clear weapon in the game, as it's a special weapon that rolls with Ambitious Assassin as well as Chain Reaction to allow for some insane levels of explosions and damage on low health bar enemies, and honestly, I'm surprised this weapon isn't exotic with how good it is. Salvo is pretty much the opposite of the other GLs that we mentioned, as it's more so for offense rather than defense, so go crazy with it in casual content, as I know for a fact you'll have a good time doing so. Now to end things off here with the grenade launchers, I just want to make a quick honorable mention, and that is the Interference Heavy Grenade Launcher. This weapon is found via the Gunsmith or Dares of Eternity, and is the only free-to-play heavy GL that can roll with full court. And if you don't know what full court is, I won't blame you, as it doesn't roll on weapons very often, but essentially, it gives you more damage the farther you stand from the target whenever you hit it, it caps out at 25%, and a roll like Field Prep, Auto-Loading, or Clown combined with full court is fantastic. Heavy GLs may not be meta right now, but getting this weapon as a god roll could save you tons of trouble down the line, just in case they get buffed. Up next from grenade launchers, let's talk about our favorite little voop voop weapons and move on to fusion rifles. Here we have the Null Composer, Cartesian Coordinate, and Glacioclasm. Starting things off, we have the easiest of the fusions to get, and that is the Null Composer Ritual Fusion Rifle. This weapon up until this season was known as the Reservoir Burst Fusion for ad clearing lower tier enemies, but in light of the recent meta where rapid fire fusions are king, most people use this weapon with Feeding Frenzy and high impact reserves as a DPS option against bosses. If you're looking for a reliable fusion that can act as both ad clear and boss damage, Null Composer is a pretty easy god roll to bag for yourself. Moving on from Null Composer, we have the preferred rapid fire fusion by the community, the Cartesian Coordinate, and for good reason. This weapon comes from the World Loot Pool and just has a better overall perk selection, at least as far as boss damage goes. With a perk roll like Feeding Frenzy, Slideways, or Lead from Gold with Vorpal Weapon, you'd be in the presence of a weapon with some of the best DPS that can be currently seen by a legendary fusion. I doubt this weapon will continue to be meta going into Witch Queen, but grinding out a god roll for the remainder of Season of the Lost, it can't exactly hurt. Lastly, for the fusion rifles, we have the most interesting one of them all, and that is the Glacioclasm fusion from the Dawning. This weapon is basically Null Composer but on steroids, as it's a high impact frame giving it massive damage, and that damage can be combined with either Slide Shot or Subsistence in the first column with Reservoir Burst in the second. Basically, Reservoir Burst, as we all know, requires a full mag to proc its extra damage and explosion, but with Subsistence or Slide Shot, you can pretty much guarantee that that mag is full at all times without actually reloading to give you no downtime to take advantage of the perk. Not exactly insane for in-game content, but too good of a combo to not mention in today's video. Moving on over from fusion rifles, let's talk about our final group of special weapons for the video, the sniper rifles. Here we have the Adored, Yuzume, Long Walk, and Praetor's Revenge with Frozen Orbit as honorable mentions. Kicking things off, of course, we need to talk about the Adored, as it's pretty much the poster child of snipers in the game right now. Perfect for PvE, perfect for PvP, and most importantly, it's a ritual weapon, which means it's easy to get and an easy god roll to add to your arsenal. Adored is a part of the good sustained damage group of snipers, as it rolls with both triple tap and Vorpal, although we haven't really seen much of a sniper meta in a very long time outside of Succession and Izanagi's, but Adored is a great pickup for any player out there, and there's no reason to not have it. Moving on from Adored, we have a weapon that's pretty much the exact same, but only slightly better for those of you guys that really want to min-max, and that is the Yuzume RR4 that comes from Nightfalls. It pretty much holds the same role as Adored, but with the ability to get a higher magazine and some slightly different perks. I'd recommend rocking triple tap Vorpal on this thing, same as Adored. Up next from Yuzume though, we enter into a sniper rifle that fills a completely different place in the sandbox compared to the other two we just talked about, and that's the Long Walk from Prophecy. This weapon basically fills that succession role within gameplay as something you want to use to just tank an enemy's health bar when needed and not necessarily needing a prolonged sustained damage. The Long Walk can roll with Clown or Overflow combined with Firing Line, which will actually give it more damage than Succession on a shot-for-shot basis, so as long as you're near teammates, which is pretty often inside raids or master content. Now, moving on to an honorable mention, I'd like to get a bit closer to Succession by not needing to use Firing Line, and the sniper that allows you to do that is Frozen Orbit. Now, this weapon is available via a Crucible drop, and it's in the energy slot for a change, but just remember that it's very hard to grab a god roll of playlist weapons, but if you do so happen to get one, hold on to it for dear life, because I've been trying to get a good rolled one of these since it came out, to no avail. Be on the lookout for Clown Cartridge, auto-loading, Lead from Gold, or Triple Tap in the first column, accompanied by Vorpal in the second, and you'll be sitting very pretty with this one. Frozen Orbit is one of the best PvE snipers in the game, but it's super unfortunate that it's so hard to get your hands on, so if you have a god roll, please cherish it for me. Now, lastly for the sniper rifles, we have our final honorable mention, and that's the Praetor Venge from Vault of Glass. This weapon is essentially a king of DPS for the sniper class, but unfortunately has one major flaw that I can't overlook, and that is its synergy with a divinity bubble, as there is none. Praetor is a rapid fire sniper that can roll with rewind rounds, which is just triple tap on crack, and high impact reserves or frenzy for your damage bonus. To get the most out of the sniper, you'd like to pair it with someone on your fire team using divinity, but unfortunately, rewind rounds doesn't work with the div bubble, taking away a lot of potential DPS. If Bungie fixes that, Praetor will instantly become one of the best snipers in the game, but it's almost been 6 months and we haven't seen any progress on that front yet. Still worth a pickup though. Finally, this late into the video, we've made our way to the dedicated heavy weapons category, so let's kick things off with swords. Here we have the Other Half, Falling Guillotine, and Zephyr. First up, we're going to be talking about the Other Half. This weapon is the more rare but also better version of Half-Truths from Dares of Eternity. With both of these swords, of course, you're using them to sword skate, but the Other Half is objectively better due to its perk selection, allowing it to double as an actual good weapon on top of utility. The roll you're looking for here is Jagged or Honed Edge with Swordmaster's Guard, and this is going to apply to literally every sword we talk about, with Eager Edge, and honestly any of the final perk columns, but personally, I'm looking for Vorpal. Up next from the Other Half, we have a weapon that Bungie has tried to bury with nerfs all its life, but it still comes out on top, the Falling Guillotine Vortex Sword. This weapon can be found in the World Loot Pool and is simply the go-to sword for any content in the game. Whether you're chopping away at ads, bosses, or champions, Falling Guillotine remains king regardless of what class or setup that you're using. I'd recommend Relentless Strikes and Whirlwind Blade on this thing, although Surrounded isn't all that bad since the Whirlwind Blade nerf. Now, Falling Guillotine is a pretty basic pick as it's just a straightforward damage dealing sword, but fortunately, we also have another sword featured on this list that brings a bit more spice to the table, and that is the Zephyr Stasis Sword from Dawning. Now sadly, if you're a true free-to-play player and don't own Beyond Light, for example, you can't take advantage of this sword, but considering you'll only be able to farm it for 1 month out of the year, I'd pick one up from the Dawning just in case whenever it rolls around. This sword comes with the unique perk Cold Steel that allows it to slow and freeze enemies when hit, and because of this, Zephyr is a one-of-a-kind weapon inside D2, so there's no reason not to get it. I'd rock Relentless Strikes and Cold Steel as my main 2 perks. Now, moving on from swords, we've made our way into an explosive entrance with rocket launchers. In this category, we have the Ascendancy, Royal Entry, Hothead, and Hezen Vengeance. Starting things off with the Ascendancy, this weapon is a ritual weapon, and just like all ritual weapons, is a pretty easy god roll to get your hands on. Now this weapon is known as the Reliable Explosive Light Rocket as it comes with great perks and built-in tracking unlike the others. Unfortunately, now that we found ourselves in a Gallowhorn meta, Explosive Light doesn't have all that much synergy with Wolfpack rounds, making it not as good as other rocket launchers when someone is present with Gallowhorn. Regardless though, it's still fantastic and there's no reason not to get one. Now up next from Ascendancy, we have the best rocket in the game hands down, the Royal Entry. This weapon drops inside the Strike playlist and has a multitude of rolls that absolutely slap. First up, we have the most meta roll in the game right now, which is Field Prep or Impulse Amplifier with Clown Cartridge. This is going to play into the Gala meta perfectly by giving this weapon 2 in the mag after every reload for tons more Wolfpack rounds, with Field Prep and Impulse giving it much needed reload buffs. For a more solo friendly roll, we have Auto-Loading Holster and Lasting Impression, with Field Prep and Impulse also being a decent contender if you don't get auto-loading. Royal Entry is also part of the precision frame of rockets, meaning that just like Ascendancy, it has built-in tracking with 0 downsides elsewhere, making it the ultimate rocket for PvE. Up next from Royal Entry, we have its easier to farm counterpart, the Hothead from Nightfall Strikes. Although Hothead lacks intrinsic tracking and the ability to roll Lasting Impression, it's the perfect rocket launcher when playing with a group that's using Gallowhorn. The roll you're looking for is Field Prep Clown Cartridge, and you'll be able to make Wolfpack rounds fly like nobody's business. Again, Royal Entry is technically better here due to the built-in tracking, but your chances of getting a god-rolled Hothead are much higher, plus it also has a sexy Adept version, which should be noted. Speaking of an adept version, we also have our final rocket launcher for the video, the Hezen Vengeance from Vault of Glass. This rocket is one of the most unique in the game due to its ability to roll with overflow. Because it's the only rocket in the game that's capable of this, overflow lasting impression is the roll you should be looking out for on this thing, and that's about all that needs to be said. Finally, with rocket launchers out of the way, we find ourselves at the final weapon category of the video, machine guns. Here we have the Swarm, the Seraph Saw, Corrective Measure, and an honorable mention in the form of the Avalanche. Let's get started. First up, starting with the Swarm, this weapon drops from the Nightfall playlist and comes with one of the best perk combos you can ask for these kinds of weapons, Bottomless Grief and One for All. Vorpal's also there too, but I don't recommend it too much nowadays on heavies since the nerf. Bottomless Grief and One for All have pretty good synergy, as Bottomless is going to add 14 more bullets to your magazine, with One for All being there to give you a 35% damage bonus to allow you to easily slay out adds with a near endless magazine. Normally I run Flared Magwell to make that reload speed a little bit more bearable, as this weapon doesn't have auto-loading holster, but all in all, one of the best feeling machine guns out there with top-notch perks. Now moving on from the Swarm, we have my personal favorite machine gun, the Seraph Saw, which can be gotten through the Gunsmith or Dares of Eternity when in rotation. This weapon, unlike the Swarm, can get auto-loading holster and field prep, which one will help you reload passively, while the other drastically boosts the reload speed when crouched and gives you more reserve ammo. Seraph Saw also comes with Firing Line, which is a general 20% damage buff when near allies, and the Saw is the only machine gun capable of rolling this. It's a really nice roll since the Vorpal nerf, so I'd keep my eyes peeled for any roll with auto-loading or field prep with Firing Line on it. Next up, we have a machine gun that was built for both ad clear and ability builds, the Corrective Measure. This weapon comes from the Vault of Glass and is part of that crispy 450 archetype like Hammerhead and Commemoration. Corrective Measure can roll with an ability-based roll like Demo Adrenaline, and an excellent ad-clear roll like Subsistence One for All. Corrective Measure is also void, unlike the previous arc machine guns we just spoke about, so it's perfect for whenever you're needing a popping a ton of void shields. Corrective Measure is unlike any other machine gun in the game, so definitely worth a pickup. Finally, for the machine guns and the video as a whole, we have our last weapon and overall honorable mention, the Avalanche Machine Gun. This weapon comes from the Dawning and is unfortunately the best solar machine gun we have, which sucks given its limited availability. It's the same archetype as Corrective Measure and rolls with either auto-loading or subsistence in the first column with Vorpal in the second. I'm a massive fan of this weapon as I really dislike the Iron Banner machine gun and Europa's Thermal Erosion, but since my main reason for featuring it on this video is its element, I can't really place it any higher than honorable mention. With that being said though, my voice is absolutely about to give out, and that's going to be it for today's video. Hot damn, was this a long one, and I think by the time I'm done editing this all together, this might be the longest video on my channel by far. If you somehow watched this entire video from front to back without using timestamps, I salute you, soldier, because holy shit, this video was just one massive information bomb, and my vocal cords are literally about to die as I've done this entire commentary in one sitting. Anyways, as always, the support on the channel has been phenomenal, and I cannot thank you guys enough. I want to get this video out before Witch Queen because I know there's a ton of you free-to-play players out there that are probably going to be making Witch Queen your first ever DLC since Christmas just passed, and I want this to be the ultimate guide for you so that you can get your arsenal ready to take back the light when Witch Queen launches. Anyways guys, thank you all so much for watching the video. Each and every one of you are super cute, and I'm going to go ahead and sign off so I can start editing this monster together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.